For 10 whole years, he did not touch a single morsel of food or a drop of water. Instead, he spent his days training very hard in really dangerous places, subjecting himself to all kinds of pain on purpose because he was on a mission to become a god. It all started 2,500 years ago. There was a big fight between the kingdoms of Kasola and Magadha over the river Ganges. Kapadofu's palace was attacked by Kosala, and the people who were caught in the war had to suffer. They not only lost their relatives, but also suffered from hunger and lack of work. The people could only hope that one day someone special would be born to help them out of this situation. Until one day the king's son, Dikapal Atu, was born. He was born on the day Prince Siddhartha was born. Everyone could feel an intense aura in the air. The sun shone like never before, and the people realized that he was blessed by the gods. The villagers are amazed, and all the animals gathered to see this special event. In this event, the villagers celebrated the arrival of Aka's heir, and everyone congratulated the king. Although Maya is happy about the blessings being showered on her son, she feels weak and faints. King Prajapati and his soldiers rush back to the city when they hear the news that the queen is in danger. When Prajapati reaches Maya, she presents the baby Siddhartha to him. He holds the baby lovingly, and Maya shares that she wants to name him Siddhartha, meaning someone who achieves his goal. Pragati really likes the name, but things get scary when Maya starts to feel pain. She asks to hug the baby. Pragati gives Siddhartha to Maya and says that Siddhartha will be extraordinary and has great faith. She caresses her baby for the last time. Before passing away, she can only embrace her son, while Siddhartha weeps for the loss of his mother. A priest called in to see King Pragati, who is honored that the priest has come to see them. A and Pragati go to Siddhartha's room, but are surprised to see the baby. Pragati asks him the reason, and tells him to look at how the baby has one finger pointing to the sky, and another finger pointing to the ground. This means that he is the most revered in heaven and earth, which means that this child will be the king of the world. Prajapati is shocked by this revelation and is amazed, but adds that unfortunately, he will not be alive to witness it. Siddhartha grows up. 10 years later, Siddhartha is being entertained by some dancers, but he is not impressed. He gets tired and walks away from the dancers to the balcony. There he looks at something with anger on his face. Fedara joins the other children as an older one tells them to grow up to become great warriors to defeat Kosala. Siddhartha stands up and asks the elder if the war will really lead to death. The old man says there are some survivors, but Siddhartha wants to know what happens to a person after they die. The old man mentions a funeral, but Siddhartha persists by asking what happens to the dead after the funeral. The old man shuts him up, saying that he came to teach, not to debate. Siddhartha feels sad, however. A boy named Heda whispers to him that he should go play because the lesson portends another boy. He agrees. And when the two children take Siddhartha to go play, the children are hunting a rabbit with their improvised bow and arrow. Heda misses the first shot and the rabbit escapes. They chase it into a corner. Heda is about to shoot again when Ciara jumps to stop it. The rabbit escapes when she misses the arrow. Heda asks what Sarah's deal is. He pushes him away, and then he and the other boy go to hunt another animal. Siddhartha feels sad and starts thinking about hunting living creatures. He wanders through the forest, and the animals that are close by are not afraid of him. They come out of their hiding place to look at him. However, the moment is short-lived, as Heda falls into a swamp and cannot get out. Siddhartha hears him calling for help and rushes to help him. The boy is trying to reach Heda, while Siddhartha, seeing the situation, approaches with a branch. He pulls it down with his body weight, and the other boy also jumps on the branch. The branch becomes low enough for Heda, who desperately tries to grab onto it. But she can only grab the edge, as it breaks immediately when she grabs it. Heda is desperately calling for help, but unfortunately, it is already too late as he is completely submerged in the swamp. Zarta and the other boy are in a state of shock, unable to react. The news reaches the people, and they all run to the forest where Heda's mother is, crying over the loss of her son, and the people gather to comfort her. Siddhartha walks away from the group, feeling sad. Siddhartha wants to hide his crying face from everyone, but can't, so he runs into his stepmother's arms crying, and the stepmother hugs him, thanking him that he is okay, but also comforts him as he cries, saying that Heda is dead. Zarta weakens from crying and collapses into his mother's arms. She hugs him tightly. Crying along with her son, his stepmother takes him to her room to rest. The nanny informs them about the arrival of King Prajapati, but Siddhartha is ashamed of himself. As he lies on the bed with his back to his mother, she tells him that everything will be alright and that he should get some sleep. Then she lets him rest and meets the king, who asks how Zender is. She apologizes by blaming herself and saying that her dereliction of duty caused the situation. King Prajapati tells her that Maya was weak after giving birth to Siddhartha, but that they should show more love to Siddhartha than to Maya. She thanks him for his kind words, and then tells him that Siddhartha is old enough to receive martial arts training. Sartha, who is not asleep, can hear their entire conversation. Siddhartha is learning to shoot an arrow and the instructor yells at him as he gives Sartha instructions. Sartha is struggling to pull the bow. The soldiers begin to spar with each other, but stop when they see that Silk's companion is too violent. They are worried about Prince Siddhartha. Siddhartha is holding his sparring partner, who attacks him with full force. Siddhartha tries to block the attack with his shield but loses it and falls to the ground, which he has to rush back to avoid being hurt by all the attacks. 5 years later, Siddhartha is training with his partner and the soldiers, who look on in amazement, commenting on how he has improved. Fedara can counterattack and attack his opponent without fail. His father is proud to see his son who has improved. His opponent praises him for becoming so strong, smiling at his achievement of teaching Siddhartha. However, Siddhartha is not pleased. As he sheathes his sword and walks away, a soldier rushes to deliver an emergency letter as the war against Kosala is about to begin. Siddhartha asks his father why they need to fight, and his father says that they have been able to avoid war in recent years, but not this time. His father tells him to get off to a good start. Siddhartha asks what that means, and his father says Sidera should do it, defeat Kosala, inherit his place and become the king of his country. But Sidera asks his father why there is war, why humans kill each other. His father shouts at him saying that if he does not fight, Kosala will not be conquered. But Siddhartha is not convinced that his father asks him how he plans to be king with that mentality. Kosala and Shakisha charge at each other without concern for the village. Sidera watches from above as the countries fight, trampling the village, arrows on the front lines of the koalas finishing them off. However, the koala war leader continues to advance, inciting his men to follow him. Zarta sees the piles of bodies and cannot bear to watch them advance with his men onto the battlefield. Both sides attack each other with everything they have. The king rides his horse, knocking down some of Kosala's men, but the Kosala leader and his soldiers still have the upper hand, easily eliminating Shaka's soldiers. Zarta enters the battlefield, shouting at everyone to stop, but his cries fall on deaf ears. Siddhartha is surrounded by Kosala soldiers who identify him as the prince and leader, seeking to kill him to earn a title. The Shakya soldiers attempt to protect Siddhartha, but are easily eliminated. The Kosala leader tries to attack Siddhartha, but suddenly the guy seems to move slowly the closer he gets. Siddhartha arrives. When he gets closer to Siddhartha, he doesn't unsheath his sword at that moment and just stares at the guy. The guy starts spitting blood and his horse becomes restless and ends up falling down, still spitting blood. Siddhartha and the guy keep looking at each other, and the Ra'a guy realizes that things are different because it feels as if Siddhartha is looking deep into his soul and judging him. The Ra'a guy hits the ground hard and his men come to control him, but he passes away immediately. Kosala's soldiers are ordered to retreat immediately. One soldier tells Siddhartha to return to the army, and other soldiers shout to each other to retreat and protect Prince Siddhartha. Retreating with the rest of the under the night sky, with the moon illuminating the surroundings of Princess Yashodhara. His wife approaches him, asking why he is not resting. She mentions that he sits there every day and night until it is very late and asks him if he has any worries. He replies that humans die and get sick easily, wondering why they can't do anything. Siddhartha turns the page of a pre-scroll in his hand and asks why people have to give up when they suffer from an incurable disease. He wonders aloud why they have to close their eyes while waiting for death to come and alleviate her suffering. Fedara believes that life is full of suffering. As she stands up, memories flash back to when she traveled around the country and saw people suffering. She remembers a young slave boy trampled by a fruit merchant just for stealing from him out of hunger. This boy clings to the stolen orange, enduring the pain as the merchants continue to trample him. In the present, Siddhartha tells Princess Yashodhara that although he was born a prince, he feels he knows nothing. He thinks he is more ignorant than the Udras. A group of people express their desire to learn everything about the world. Yashodhara hugs him from behind and says his name. Prince Siddhartha tells him to rest for a few years. Then the royal family gathers in the princess's room because she has just had a baby. Prince Siddhartha goes out on the porch of the palace and says to himself that although he learns a lot, all he sees is people suffering and no one teaches him how to fix it. In his mind, he sees many people who need help and they approach him as if they want to drag him into a black hole. Horror grips people as he realizes that, as a future leader, he cannot prevent people from getting sick, growing old and dying. Sartha understands that these inevitabilities are part of life, and he knows that he himself will go through these stages as a human being. This thought plunges him into darkness, struggling against the reality of life, which brings pain. Desperate to find a way out of this suffering, Sartha finds himself sitting in the lotus position under a tree in the jungle. He decides to leave everything behind and search for the truth in the middle of the night. He leaves a note for his father. Siddhartha, feeling sad for disappointing him, sets off up the hill, riding his horse. A man named Chana catches up with him and begs him to return. Sartha strips off his royal ornaments and robe, handing them to Shanana, and cuts his hair completely off, becoming bald. He asks Shanana to give his hair to Princess Yasara, telling her that he will return after finding the path to success. With tears in her eyes, Shanana watches as Sartha walks away with a single robe around her waist. Emphasizing his determination to seek a different path, Siddhartha sets out on his journey to find his own way. He believes in the prophecy that he will become a great person and erase the suffering of all living beings. She wishes him well as he becomes an ascetic monk and travels the world. Our prota's journey is hard. He depends on the kindness of strangers for food and sleep, wherever he can find shelter. Walking under adverse weather, one day Siddhartha arrives at a village where people are practically collapsed on the ground, moved by the scene. Siddhartha does not hesitate to use a robe to cover a shivering mother and child, leaving everyone amazed at this compassionate gesture. While spending some time in the village, they decide to head towards a stream. On their way, a man approaches him, and noticing that Siddhartha's hair and beard are growing, comments that this is not appropriate for a monk. However, instead of criticizing him, he offers him a razor to trim his hair and beard, then invites him to his house for a bath. Siddhartha accepts the invitation, and once in the man's house, the man gives him a robe to make him feel more comfortable, and praises him for how well it fits him. Another monk present in the house asks him for a glass of water, and the man, excited to have 2 monks in his house, happily runs to fetch it. When Siddhartha introduces himself to the other monk is surprised to ask if he is Prince Shakan. Confirmed by Siddhartha, the conversation between the 2 monks is abruptly interrupted when the man returns with the bowl of water. He asks her for a favor, explaining that his son wants to be a monk. His wife takes the children out and points to Asahi as the one who wants to become a monk. Asahi already has his hair cut. Siddhartha and Dev take Asahi on their journey. As they travel together, Siddhartha asks Deva about the scar on his left eye. Deva tells him that while he was meditating on a rock, some people saw and provoked him by saying that asceticism was meaningless. He responds by explaining that asceticism, the purpose is to go beyond the limits and be reborn in the next life. One of the people challenges him by asking him why he doesn't burn his eyes. After hesitating for a moment, he grabs the torch and surprises everyone by burning his left eye. With it, he explains to Siddhartha that he was told that self-mortification was pointless, so he burns out his own eyes to prove them wrong. Deva shares that the most impressive act of asceticism he witnessed was a man transforming into a beast who lived a life in nature without desires or distractions. He believes that overcoming the limit of self-mortification will lead to a great reincarnation. According to Defei, the more suffering one endures in life, the better one is reborn in the next life. Asahi, smiling, is behind them lying with a butterfly. He definitely suggests to Siddhartha that he should go to the atheistic forest. Siddhartha does not argue, but is skeptic about it. Walking through the swamp, Asahi hurts his foot on a thorny vine. At the bottom of the river, screaming in pain, he loses his balance and begins to drown. Siddhartha dives underwater, running towards Asahi, and swims back to the surface, holding him by the hand. From then on, Siddhartha carries Asahi on his back for the rest of the journey. They traverse various landscapes, from a scorching desert to a mountaintop with a waterfall and through a jungle. Pausing at a river, Siddhartha has Asahi's wound. Before continuing on their mountain trail, they arrive at a village. They stop to meditate and receive food offered by the villagers. Traveling at night, they encounter a group of men on horseback. The leader, recognizing the defeat of their past encounter, calls out to them. Siddhartha quickly intervenes and explains that Asahi is ill and needs urgent treatment. Tata, the man who helped them, takes good care of Asahi, prepares medicine in a pot and gives it to Siddhartha to drink, explaining that it is the only medicine Siddhartha has. He then asks Tata to warm a sword for him. Tata wonders why Siddhartha needs the sword, and he tells him it is to suck the bad stuff out of Asahi's wound. Siddhartha does just that, and then uses the hot blade to close Asagi's wound. She screams from the pain and ends up fainting, but immediately Tata tells everyone that Asagi is not breathing. In his sleepy state, Asagi asks if he is already dead. When he hears a voice, it is Siddhartha's mother, who is now a god, telling him that he cannot die yet because he is destined to live together with Siddhartha. She asks Asagi to please support Siddhartha. Siddhartha is doing CPR on Asagi, and suddenly Asagi starts sweating and coughing. Both Tata and Siddhartha are relieved and say that he is a tough kid. Tata shares that in the past he would have used his power to possess a bird and find better medicine. Deva, now awake, asks if Tata still has that power, but Tata explains that he lost it. Unfortunately, Asagi is still in danger, as her fever will not go down unless her leg is healed. Deva shares with Tata that he heard about a mysterious boy named Tata who had the unique ability to possess things. It turns out that when Tata was a child, could burn his body with the animals. For many years he remained a child and his body did not age. However, once he lost his powers, he suddenly became an adult. Deva mentions that he heard that Tata does not age, but Tata corrects him by saying that he is now an adult. At that moment, a blind lady enters the room and asks if Tata has returned. Tata informs her that he is at home with 2 monks and a child. When Siddhartha speaks, Miga recognizes his voice and drops the logs from her hands upon hearing him. They knew each other from before. When Siddhartha was a prince, he fell in love with Miga after she saved him from bandits who were pestering him. They spent time together and she took him through a village. In a boat, they once fell into the river and began to play in it. When his father discovered their relationship, he ordered Miga to be executed. Siddhartha heard about this and interrupted the throne room where his father was having a meeting. Filled with rage, he was ready to draw his sword against his own father. The gods and all present pleaded with the young prince to calm down. Recognizing the gravity in Siddhartha's eyes, the king suggested an alternative. Proposed that if Siddhartha would marry Princess Yasara, he would free Milia. Siddhartha accepted the decision. However, upon arriving in the courtyard, Siddhartha discovered that a guard had burned Milia's eyes out with a sword as punishment. Despite the pain, Milia harbored no hatred for Siddhartha and was happy to have met him. She wished that he would become a great king. The guards took him away and left her alone in spite of her blindness. Siddhartha was so hurt that he scraped his finger on the pavement. He was still in shock. After all these years, he apologizes to her, feeling regretful for not becoming the great king she desired. Hurt, she runs out of the room. This person who heard Siddhartha's name asks him if he is really the prince and mentions that he has been looking for Siddhartha. Tata informs Siddhartha that his village was attacked by Kosala soldiers, resulting in the murder of his family's friends and the destruction of his village. Tata expresses strong dislike for the Kosala soldiers and reveals that he has been fighting against them. However, due to his social position, there were limits he could not achieve. Tata emphasizes that ending a war between countries is a task that only a king can accomplish. He earnestly implores Siddhartha to become king and destroys Kosala while seeking revenge for the suffering and losses he and his people suffered outside. Mila tries to regain her bearings, and this guy keeps pestering Siddhartha to become the king. However, he asks her to wait 10 years and explains what he plans to do. Siddhartha declares his intention to practice asceticism for the next decade and adds that if he has not found the answer by then, he will return to his country the next morning. Asahi wakes up and starts shouting about a whirlwind, which he throws out of the house screaming, and the others do not believe him as it is sunny. Asahi runs down the hill towards the village, shouting to the villagers that a whirlwind is coming and tells them to evacuate, but unfortunately, no one responds to his urgent calls. Suddenly, the wind begins to pick up speed and turns into a whirlwind. Asahi urgently tells the villagers to run as fast as they can. Unfortunately, it is too late, and the whirlwind is near. It rips through the village, sucks in stray villagers, and rips houses out of the ground, causing chaos. Asahi manages to rescue a small boy who has almost been sucked into the wind. After a while, the winds pass and calm returns, but the village was shattered. Siddhartha and the others arrive at the village, witnessing the chaos that unfolded. To their surprise, they discover that Asahi can predict the future. He had also predicted that he would die in 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days. Siddhartha, Defei, and Asahi leave for the forest to train. They travel through highlands, deserts, rice paddies, villages, plains, and various other terrains until they reach their destination, Atheistic Forest. In the forest, they observe various monks undergoing different challenges. Asahi walks to a swamp where a man emerges, surprising Asahi and making him fall backwards. Siddhartha asks the man if diving under the swamp is also a method of training. The man explains that it is a bottomless swamp to practice with holding one's breath. He definitely elaborates on various training methods, such as using a tree to hang oneself, burying oneself in sand to fast, and using a coffin to clear the mind. He definitely states that the atheistic forest is the most suitable place for such training. Siddhartha and Death sit in a thorn bush, meditating despite being disturbed by flies. They remain in the same position for a long time, completely ignoring the various weather conditions and events around them. Asahi does not participate but observes them. Siddhartha is anxious to find out what is at the end. After this self-mortification, they also attempt a sand fast. And at this point, both Siddhartha and Death are already quite thin. Siddhartha notices Asahi making marks on a tree and approaches him and asks what he is doing. Asahi replies that he is counting the days. He explains that a few marks on a tree represent 1 year and that he will die on the 5th tree, and says this with a smile. Siddhartha asks why Asahi is already counting the days until his death, and asks him if he is not afraid of death. But instead of waiting for it, Asahi replies that he is afraid, but it cannot be helped. Siddhartha tells him that he would have gone mad if he were in Asagi's place, and then asks Asagi how he lives each day without fearing his death. What if then, upon fulfilling his purpose in life, Asagi jumps up smiling as he tells Siddhartha that he will be able to be reborn as something greater than a man, and adds that if Siddhartha fulfills his purpose, all will be saved. Siddhartha asks how he can do this, but Asagi only smiles. In response, he continues with his training. While Duff is hanging, he remains convinced that agony and pain are his quickest ways to salvation. Siddhartha asks if Duff is suggesting that he die in the process, to which Duff replies that it is the quickest way to cleanse himself, since the human body is corrupted. However, Siddhartha rejects the idea of dying. Duff says that Siddhartha has not understood the meaning of asceticism, and that he should simply die, going so far as to call him a fool, and suggesting that he rot in hell. Siddhartha is frightened, but decides not to argue further, while Asahi continues to mark the trees. Siddhartha begins to wonder if it is foolish to torture oneself. He wonders if all these extreme practices will really lead to salvation. Federa faces a difficult moment, but fortunately Tata steps in to help him. Tata takes Siddhartha to a river and gives him water to save him from being very thirsty. Siddhartha wonders why Tata came to rescue him, and Tata says that he will not let Siddhartha die from training. Tata even offers him an apple, but Siddhartha says no because he is crying. Tata tries to force Siddhartha to eat, but then some monks approach, and the leader approaches first and asks Tata if he is the one who took Siddhartha out of his training. Defei attacks Tata, telling him not to disturb Siddhartha's training, and even calls him a demon for distracting Siddhartha. Tata asks Defei if he is seriously okay with Siddhartha dying. Lafei says that dying while doing training lasted. It brings eternal glory, and Tata should not mess with Siddhartha's training. Diefa yells at Tata to leave, and the other monks start chanting for Tata to leave. Suddenly, Tata notices smoke and runs to the hut where Mila is. It is on fire, and Siddhartha, hearing Mila's name, becomes more conscious. Tata rushes and finds some monks burning the hut. He pushes them out of the way and runs towards the burning hut, shouting to Mila. Seeing her in a corner, he quickly grabs her and carries her. He gets out just before the hut collapses completely. Tata takes Mila to hide in a cave. When Siddhartha approaches, Tata warns that he will cut down anyone who comes near. Federa identifies herself, and Tata calms down. Federa asks about Mila's condition, and Tata says she is ill. Siddhartha wants to see her, but Tata explains that she is not well enough to meet him. They came to save Siddhartha, not the other way around. Federa decides to enter the cave and meet Mila, but she yells at him to stay away. She is in pain, moving heavily, and crying as her body is covered with boils. Federa kneels beside her, deeply affected by her condition, and asks her how much more she has to endure. At the next training session, which involves hanging from a rope over a cliff, Dafa asks Siddhartha if he is thinking about Mila. Dafa instructs him to concentrate on training, but Siddhartha says he can't ignore people suffering. He definitely insists that it is wrong for someone in the atheistic forest not to practice asceticism. Siddhartha responds by saying that they don't understand, and that no one in the forest is experiencing as much pain as Mila. Tata takes care of Mila by bringing food for her, but she does not want to eat it. She tells her to go wherever she wants, because there is no more hope for her. Tata says he shouldn't talk like that, but insists that if she dies, he is free. Tata puts the food aside, hugs her, and promises to save her. Siddhartha watches what is happening from outside the cave. Asahi opens the coffin where Siddhartha is, and Siddhartha asks if there is no hope to save Mila. Asahi assures him that he will rescue her. Siddhartha asks how Asahi plans to save her, and Asahi says he will do it the same way he saved Siddhartha. So our protagonist begins to suck Mila's body. Tata tries to stop him, but Siddhartha insists that this is the only way to save her. Tata offers to do it in his place because he worries that Siddhartha might get a disease. Siddhartha tells Tata that if she gets tired they can change, and that they should work together. Mila embarrasses herself by crying and calling herself dirty, but Siddhartha reassures her that she is not dirty and that he will make sure she gets all the poison out of her. The next day, Siddhartha interrupts his meditation to check on Mila. Shepa notices him leaving and becomes angry, wondering how long Siddhartha will keep trying to save her. When Siddhartha arrives and sees that she has almost completely recovered from her illness, Mila and Tata are grateful and ask Siddhartha how they could repay him. Defy and some monks come to the cave accusing him of neglecting his training as a monk to be with them. Defy tells Siddhartha to leave and the other monks support him. They interrupt Tata, telling Siddhartha that he will leave with Maila and that Siddhartha must continue his training. He asks Siddhartha to forget the promise to return to his country and become a king, but he let out his anger when Mila was treated, and now he understands how Siddhartha's important actions are for Mila. She adds that she had cursed herself, feeling angry for falling in love with him, and that he broke her heart and she became blind. Now that they have met again, she feels alive and thanks Siddhartha for not only saving her body, but also her heart. She tells Siddhartha that once he becomes a great monk, she should make him her first disciple. That night, Asahi is marking the tree and tells Siddhartha that on the night of the next full moon, he will die. Federa asks Asahi how he will die. When he looks so healthy, Asahi tells him that he will die being devoured by hungry beasts. Siddhartha asks Asahi if the prediction of his death is accurate and if he will really face such a tragic end. Asahi confirms it, still smiling. He promises Asahi that whatever happens, he will always be his best friend and will protect him. Asahi falls off a cliff while trying to reach some eggs in a nest. Siddhartha is meditating when he hears Asahi's cries and quickly rushes to help him. Our Pota reaches the foot of the mountain and finds Asahi safe. While fishing, Asahi falls into the river. Our Pota interrupts his meditation once again to run quickly to his aid. Fortunately, he finds Asahi safe, smiling and greeting him. On the night of the full moon, Siddhartha stops meditating and decides that he will not let Asahi die. What he was going to do is to tie Asahi to a tree branch. Suddenly, a rabbit climbs up the tree where Asahi is and starts nibbling at the rope. The rope breaks and Siddhartha wakes up from his dream. Asahi is gone, and Nostropota quickly looks around. Meanwhile, to find him, Asahi willingly follows the rabbit into the forest. He passes by a bush and accidentally falls into a hole full of wolves. Asahi sees all the baby wolves screaming because they are hungry. Asahi goes and comforts the baby wolves by telling them to get food. Soon they lie down on the ground as two adult wolves approach. Siddhartha arrives at the hole, shocked and crying as he sees the wolves tearing Asahi's body apart. Siddhartha screams in horror and runs away from the terrible sight, running until he stumbles and falls to the ground, being covered in weeds. He mourns for Asahi. As the days pass, undergoes extremely painful practices of asceticism. He burrows his way through a thorn bush, needles pierce his flesh, walks over an embracing fire that burns his entire body, and even ties himself to a tree. The trunk allows hungry crows to peck at his body. The other monks come and chase the birds away, begging him to stop and understand his self-mortification. Then they recognize that he is an excellent monk, but he tells them that he has not suffered enough. And they are concerned about how Siddhartha has been doing these training practices since Asaji died. To the point that for the last 10 days, he hasn't even been drinking water. They finally recognize that Siddhartha has reached the highest state of asceticism. He sits on a bed of thorns to meditate on a cold cliff while it is pouring rain and thundering. He repeats to himself that he will become a rock, and in the storm he turns to water, but the strong winds prove too powerful, hurling him from the top of a cliff, and he plunges into the stream of water beneath his body. It floats up or down and assumes it has become one with nature. It survives as it lies down at the shallow end of the stream, but cannot move. He lies there with his eyes open, closing them occasionally. He wonders if this is death, or the self-mortification he spoke of from Phi. As he closes his eyes, he reaches a totally different state. Then he hears the voice of his mother calling him and telling him not to die. Then she appears before him and tells him that Asagi was born to be eaten by wolves, to convey to him that all of life is connected. Siddhartha asks if Asagi's death was to teach him the laws of nature, which his mother affirms, making him cry at the tragedy of Asagi's fate. Before she disappears, she urges him to stay alive, but Siddhartha did not know that this was his mother because he asked her who she was. Just as she disappears, he wakes up to the smell of steaming porridge and swallows it in one gulp no matter how hot it is. Tears fall down his eyes as the image of smiling Asagi appears before him, back to reality, and comes face to face with a woman who is grateful that he is well. She asks him if he would like a second choice of porridge. He looks around a bit in search of the monks, but smiles and cries again. He tells her that her rice porridge has saved his life and then thanks her as he walks away. Some animals approach him. A stream is refreshed and feeling enlightened. He beckons them to come closer, saying he has a story for them. As he ties his hair in a bow, the animals follow him, and he tells them a story that explains to the animals that to live is to sustain another life, and that eating to survive is the law of nature. He points out that if the wolves that ate Sagi were full, then his death was not in vain. He says that humans are the only ones who continue to struggle in vain, because great suffering is born of this. Dev, standing under a tree, asks him if he is escaping, but he replies that he will no longer go to the forest to ascesis. He tells her that he will continue with his self-mortification until he dies and overcomes it, showing him the right path of asceticism. Siddhartha tells him that radical pursuits are pointless and proceeds to tell him a proverbio that tells Defa not to pursue asceticism or extreme pleasure and to live a modern life. Defa tells Siddhartha that he has found his own path, but will continue to walk the path he believes in Siddhartha. He walks a while from the forest and is greeted by a group of horsemen who surround him with spears. His general, Prince Haka, calls him Prince Siddhartha, but he tells him that he is no longer a prince. The prince gets down from his horse and points his sword at Siddhartha. He tells him that his family made him suffer and that he would make sure he dies. He asks Siddhartha if he feels sad and further asks him if he hates him. He also tells our Prota to take the sword from his hand and face him. Our Prota calmly tells him that he must be a poor soul and if he is going to kill him, just do it. He tells him that he doesn't hate him. Prince Haka threatens to kill him, his people and his family, but Siddhartha doesn't bother. Our Prota asks him if he enjoys his revenge, and if it has brought him joy even once, or if he makes him suffer at night. This angers him, as he is about to strike Siddhartha with his sword, but suddenly lightning strikes the sword and knocks it out of his hand. Siddhartha takes the sword and moves towards the prince. He orders his men to burn Siddhartha. They surround him, but instantly fall back due to an unknown force that stops them. Fedara returns the sword to him, telling him that he will continue to feel regret until the day of his death, suffering an eternity, and that is crueler than torture wounds or illness. So he strikes him and hands the sword to the young general, who withdraws and tells his men to withdraw as well. Siddhartha is meditating in front of a swamp when a person emerges from the swamp, fascinated to see Siddhartha meditating. He slowly approaches him and falls on his knees, saying that he wants to die, as he is the most unfortunate person in the world. Siddhartha asks him why he is so unhappy. He replies that his father and mother were trampled by an elephant and died, and his second mother died of an epidemic. Siddhartha replies by saying that his parents were the most unfortunate. The swamp man tells a story about the young Prince Haka who had abandoned his mother. The swamp man argues that the prince was cruel to let his mother die just because his mother was a slave. So why doesn't the prince receive any punishment? Siddhartha answers that the prince was also suffering because even though he is a prince, he had to watch his mother die. His pain was much deeper because he had killed countless people and had even let his mother die. The prince had to live the rest of his life full of regrets until the day he died. He comes to a shallow grave where a herd of weeds had gathered, chased them away with his sword, and then begins to dig the place, which is actually where they had buried his mother. He pulled her out of the ground and clung to her, crying and telling her lifeless body to look at his face and call him. He's saying that he had acted coldly in front of King Siddhartha. Just to please the king, begs forgiveness from his mother's lifeless body. There, the swamp man realizes that the prince is also an unfortunate person, and each carries his own burdens. Siddhartha tells him that he has suffered for that, because he should understand the suffering of other people. There also, Siddhartha tells him that if everyone is unhappy, then why everyone in this world wants to live? He places his hand on the shoulder of Siddhartha's body, and it begins to glow, and slowly spreads to the surroundings. Siddhartha tells her that his mother had died a few days after giving birth to him, and now she takes care of him. She tells him that because his mother gave birth to him, she was able to meet him. And that is how nature has its purpose. Each person has his or her own purpose in life, because we are all connected to all things in nature, and we form a bond with them. The light spreads throughout the forest and expands further. Our Prota tells the swamp man that he has a role to play in life, and that just by existing, there are people who were saved just by knowing him. The swamp man tells our Prota that he thanks him for teaching him the meaning of life, and he returns to the water, and Siddhartha stops shining and wonders when the swamp man taught him. And when did he say all that? And why did he say all those things? As the sun rises over the horizon, he hears a voice telling him that he had been enlightened and is now called Buddha. He woke up. The voice says that as long as there is life, he will spread his teachings to all the people of the world and teach them how they should live. He realizes that he has made everyone he has met happy. He enters a higher state when his mother tells him that he has reached the world and that the door to his heart has opened. She explains that people are born with a lotus flower, and when it blooms, they have unlimited potential. His mother calls him by his new name, Buddha, the Awakened One, and tells him to make the flower inside people's hearts to bloom. He replies that as long as there is life in him, he will fulfill the role assigned to him. The war comes to an end when the prince, Haka, ceases the fire, and the people of Kosala were able to return to the city to live their normal lives. Tata and Mila find happiness, just as Asagi is playing with butterflies. The sin of the afterlife disappears, and the monks continue to walk their path, while Siddhartha, the awakened Buddha, continues his journey. And so it ends. This anime.